on Tuesday. We went through a draft of this bill on municipal regulation of agriculture, had some changes that we asked them to make, and I think that's what we're going to look at now.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bradley Showman, Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'll go through some of the changes to the committee bill here. So this bill focuses solely on municipal regulation of agriculture by bylaw. And last time I was in, the committee asked me to make 5 changes, and then there is one other change that I'll discuss with you as well. The first of those changes is adding a grandfather clause. So this bill would prohibit municipal regulation of the construction of a farm structure as authorized under the required agricultural practices, except for construction of a farm structure within a Tier 1A area established in accordance with the controlling statute. Question was, what happens if there's already a farm structure and they'd like to repair or improve that structure? So we added a grandfather clause. Municipalities shall not regulate by bylaw the construction, repair, or improvement of farm structures built in a Tier 1 area prior to July 1st, 2026. That date is, I chose that date because bills are effective unless otherwise stated on July 1st, 2026. That date can change for the committee's purposes. That's just a placeholder date that I chose. But if the committee has a different date in mind, that would be amenable to changing that. We also just, what's your question?
Yeah, I think maybe we'll just take the questions as we go here. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, under that Tier 1A highlighted, you refer to construction, repair, or improvement, but what about the expansion of a barn or an ag structure? Does expansion go beyond improvement?
We can add that language in there to clarify, because I think arguably there could be an instance where a municipality wants to construe this narrowly, and we could add in expansion or improvement to clarify that piece.
That'll be up to the committee.
Yeah, so let's flag that. I think there may be more to say about this. Representative Bartholomew.
Well, in that same thing, it says construction. So if it's already there, why would you be constructing it?
So the word construction was left in there to just incorporate the act of constructing. So if a facility needed to be repaired or added onto, that might require some kind of construction. And we did not want, I think the purpose of this piece is to prohibit a municipality from regulating in a Tier 1 area the repair, improvements, expansion. If something is already there, we want an owner to be able to adjust it accordingly. And so we want to try to keep the language to meet that goal as broad as we can. Certainly, we can add or remove words as the committee deems fit.
And with this wording, cover if a farm structure is destroyed by fire and reconstructed?
That would, yes, that would include in kind of repair or reconstruction. But we can add language to anticipate certain situations, just to kind of head off potential problems down the road. And so right now the language is broad, but if we're anticipating things like a destruction of a fire or destruction in a flood, we could add in, reconstruction, just to specify that for sure.
Yeah,
I want to,
there could be just so many scenarios where a structure is old, falling down, but they want to rebuild this, something similar in the same place or lost. And I just don't want to get in the point where,
And
so I think Bradley, we want to, yeah, I think the sentiment is we want to have as broad, language as possible, but I'm going to go a little bit farther and suggest that what I think the committee was, thinking about last time we spoke was not just the scenario that you've outlined here, but that more broadly, an existing farm, could not be regulated. So in other words, if you wanted to put up a brand new barn altogether, or other farm structure, not replacing one that had been lost to fire, not expanding, not repairing, but just we need a new farm structure. That if you were already farming there, that there was, sorry,
Grandfather.
that's what we were thinking about. Yeah. So, again, I'm speaking what I think the committee was feeling the other day, but just wanted to flag that. We can circle back. Maybe we should just keep going.
Pre-Taft Street, that's been the case.
Well, pre-Taft Street, there hasn't been any ability for the municipality to regulate.
In
So,
the farm structure world, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
so they could construct a new farm structure in a tier 1A area, if so long as they were already farming. That is a little bit different than what this is.
Yeah. So the
and-
distinction I think that we're making is in tier 1A, the town can regulate some, land that's not currently being farmed. But if as of the date we choose, it's a farm, then it will remain exempt.
And
That's
that does
the
add
concept.
some, yeah, and that does add some complexity to the issue here, because the question then becomes, what activities would the committee envision incorporating here, right? And so, for example, if someone is gardening, does the committee consider that farming, or is the committee limiting the conception of farming to farming that meets the minimum threshold requirements of the required agricultural practices?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Let's just flag it, and we can come back to that. But I think you're on to it with your latter suggestion.
Okay.
Are you have a
And
question
this-
about this one? Yeah.
Connected somewhat. Bradley, right now, farm worker housing, right, is not exempt from municipal regulation. I mean, pre and post Taft Street. Is that correct?
No, it's not. That's not my understanding that farm housing is exempt, or it is not exempt from municipal bylaw.
Right. And going forward then in Act 181, is anything changing as far as farm worker housing goes in the various tiers? Because if you don't have to do an Act 250 permit for housing in certain tiers, if that's also including farm worker housing?
I'm not familiar if that act is affecting farm worker housing. As it relates to this bill does not necessarily affect farm worker housing either. But I can look into that bill to see to what effect it does have on farm worker housing. I'm not sure the question as it pertains to municipal bylaw. If you can clarify that for me, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I'm just wondering with various jurisdictions changing with Act 181,
Mhm.
whether, we talked a lot about farming and exemptions that farm worker housing's always been the sort of standalone in some ways from exemptions, and if anything to do with that, we should consider with this language.
Does the committee want to include farm worker housing to be exempt from municipal bylaw regulation? I think that would be a substantial change, but
let's flag that as something we need to better understand. But right now, I don't think it's covered at all in this section of the statute. Yeah. John.
If I understood your comments correctly, I'm wondering why we would need B at all, because it just is talking about structures. So wouldn't A cover all of that? They can't regulate farming that, that meets the threshold for the reps. Why do we need B at all?
Construction of farm structures is distinct from farming practices as such.
In the required agriculture practices?
Yeah, yes.
So
and the rules have or this statute has always made a distinction between farming and then the construction of farm structures. It's included both of those historically as distinct entities. And in particular with this bill does create an exception for construction of farm structures in Tier 1A areas. So it would, unless you want to remove that exemption, this bill would require those things to be distinct because it is not permitting a municipality to regulate farming practices in Tier 1A areas. This bill just permits a municipality to regulate by bylaw the construction of farm structures in Tier 1A areas. So that distinction is very important to keep in this bill if the committee wants to keep that distinction of constructing farm structures in Tier 1A areas. So it would be crucial to keep that for that purpose.
So existing language and statute, it's struck out there in the top of A. It says required agricultural practices, including the construction of farm structures. So we're striking that. And then what's added, the new language that follows, doesn't talk about farm structures. So instead, we've got farm structures in B. So split them out. And then taking the additional step of saying, but for those structures, Tier 1A would not apply that.
That is correct.
So let's keep going.
Okay.
I know there's still questions about this, but let's keep going to see what else is here and what other questions we may have.
Right. We changed the right to grow food to growing food. And this is a question for the committee. And I put this language in here after based on discussions that I had with Mike about things for the committee to think about in terms of what this right entails. And so we changed the right to grow food to growing food for and then added here for use of the landowner's household or non-paying guests. And the idea is that the conception of this right to grow food was for the homeowners or the property owners' own purposes, and not necessarily for sale. If the committee is envisioning protecting the sale of food or something of that sort, envisioning what an individual might be doing with that food, we'd recommend putting in language to address that and to make sure that activity is also exempt from municipal bylaw. If the committee is not anticipating that it would like to protect individuals for their ability to sell food in these circumstances, it can leave as is. That language isn't there to flag that issue for the committee here.
Yeah, I think that the distinction between selling it And using it for yourself is an important one. That's really why we've added this section here. And why we're talking about the right to grow food. And I know that that specific expression is problematic, so you've changed that, and thank you for that. But, and I think that adding this clarification is also useful, because as soon as it becomes, you know, a B and B or a small inn and you're serving meals, then I think it bleeds over into the, you know, the farming as a business question that is in, you know, the other parts of the statute. So to me, anyway, that makes sense. Representative Nelson.
So we're setting these rules up in tier 1A to protect the individual's right to feed themselves.
Setting them up actually everywhere. So the individual's right to feed themselves would be in any town that currently there is no right.
Okay, so but in tier 1A, we're not working on setting it up to be a commercial, air quotes, commercial farm. We're setting it up to this,
Yeah,
right now,
exactly.
we're under
Yes,
tier
yes.
1A.
Yeah,
So, but in 1B, we can envelop
whatever you
the
want.
rest of us.
Yeah. The way this is written, yeah.
Actually, if I can clarify that
Clarify
piece.
that, yeah.
And so this applies anywhere. And this piece applies in tier 1A areas or in other areas. And it protects an individual's right to grow food for their own purposes, flat out, wholesale, no matter where you are. If an individual were to want to grow food and sell it for their own purposes, they might be subject to the required agricultural practices rule, and they might be subject to some other municipal bylaw. So that activity of selling food is not necessarily exempt from municipal regulation. What this does is exempt from municipal regulation, growing your own food for your own purposes and non-paying guests. Anywhere.
So this is, just want to say that on the one hand, we want to be cautious about taking already a complex, you know, puzzle to solve here and throwing in this really new concept. This has nothing to do with pre-Taft Street, post-Taft Street. This is a different thing. Everybody who has been thinking about this over the summer is in agreement that it would be useful perhaps to have in statute this right to grow food for your own use. And but I think it's important that we be clear that it's for your own use. It's not for selling to anybody, either as a breakfast or, you know, out of a farm stand or anything else. It's for your own use. Non-paying guests, of course, yeah, that would count too. But I think we just want to be careful about being, you know, not having this expand into something that somebody else might, you know, who's currently on board with it says, no, that's not what we're doing. But, go
What
ahead.
I have is overlap with the Murray bill, number right to grow food bill on our wall. That has to do with apartments and housing,
Yeah.
HOAs and whatnot. I'm just wondering the overlap here of, I say I own an apartment house and you know, said, yes, perfectly fine for you to grow some food, but it needs to be done here versus there because I don't want, maybe I'm worried about, having plants too close to the house, maybe creating mold on the building, things like that, being done in such and such a way. This obviously has to do with municipalities, but would that take away the authority of someone who owns apartment buildings to be able to say where they would like the food to be grown? Or how it would be grown to make sure
That's an excellent
apartment
question. And so that bill would not impact, or this bill would not impact a property owner's right to a property owner's right to determine how their own land is used. And so this only says that municipal bylaws can't regulate that activity. But as the law is right now, if you're renting out your apartment or renting out your home, you can, in a lease contract, feasibly, homeowners associations could put in their contract you can't have a garden. And there's no law right now that prohibits property owners or homeowners associations or mobile home parks from doing that. And so the bill that's on the wall there would prohibit, as far as I know, unless it's changed since I saw a draft, and it has been a while since I've seen a draft of that bill, but would prohibit a property owner from including that in a lease term, and it would require a property owner to allow a tenant to have like a vegetable garden or something of the sort. And those are related but distinct issues.
Representative Bartholomew.
So this language doesn't fix that. And I guess the one word that I'm worried about here is it says owner's household. So if I'm renting a property and the owner of the property says, sure, you can have a garden in your backyard, I can't in here because it's for the owner's household, not the renter's household.
Should it say occupant?
I don't know what it should say, but I don't, you
Yeah.
know, if the owner, if you're renting a property and the owner says you can grow food, I don't have a problem with that. This says, no, it's got to be for the owner's household.
Mhm.
Am I reading it wrong?
I think you're reading it right. Bradley, you agree, and is there a solution?
Could say, I'm just making a note. Because it doesn't say the owner is actually growing the food, but you're right. If
It's got to be used by
changing
the
it to
owner's household.
occupant, excuse me, I'm sorry.
But the food's got to be used by the owner's household, not the renter's.
Yeah. And so we might be able to change that to occupant, but let me confer and get back to the committee on that piece, 'cause I think that might be a little bit more complicated. And if we could just clarify, just to, for the sake of clarifying and to remove any ambiguity, that's certainly the most ideal situation there.
Let's keep going.
A community garden, right, would be.
Yeah.
I just, my reservations are about growing food too, that. Because. When we talk about agriculture, it's just a wider universe, and so when you think of horses, if somebody has an animal rescue, you know, even if they're livestock for food, but they're never gonna slaughter them, you know, so it just seems to, and then the things like flower gardens, pollinator gardens, there are a lot of agricultural things that don't fall under growing food.
So your concern is that we are being too restrictive in that language?
Right.
And you would like to make the right a bigger right,
Right.
but not the right to food, okay?
More that definition of agricultural,
Uh-huh.
and I agree with you. I mean, what you flagged, I think this whole topic should go in other legislation somewhere. I think it's really tricky to add it to this, even though it is municipalities, but
Yeah, okay.
it just strikes me as a can of worms.
Okay, good. Let's keep going here.
And that would, if we were to include additional like flower gardens and pollinator things, you know, that language should change. So we'll put a pin in that. Section D, for use of the owner's household or non-paying guests, we added that as a caveat here for raising, feeding, and managing livestock. We also clarified here to get the intent correct. So for use of the owner's household or non-paying guests, provided the land base is sufficient for appropriate nutrient waste management is determined by the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock is otherwise in compliance with the required agricultural practices rule. So what this anticipates is if you are raising, feeding, or managing livestock you both have to have a sufficient land base for that and also follow the other water, mostly water quality requirements, some training requirements that are in the required agricultural practices rule. So that is, this was in another version here, but this kind of isolates that language to make it more clear that that would be a requirement for households who are raising livestock.
Representative Boswell.
Yeah, I mentioned this before and it's small and maybe not worth stirring the pot about, but what about adding guinea hens? I mean, we actually had testimony here that somebody literally had harassment from their neighbor bringing in guinea hens. I mean, if we're gonna exclude roosters, it honestly feels to me like it would be appropriate to exclude guinea hens from the automatically acceptable category.
Any other thoughts on that? I'm
They're noisy.
I'm not all that
They are
familiar with
noisy,
guinea
that's the issue,
hens.
and that's what's the problem with roosters. If roosters weren't noisy, I don't think they would be on that list.
I'm sympathetic.
Can you dechrome
What?
them? Can you dechrome them? You know, you debeak them?
I don't think so, but I am not an expert on that topic.
It's
I
not
have
permanent.
to ask consult about that.
Would you flag that and maybe, let's just go ahead and actually add that, Bradley.
Okay.
Donkeys.
Uh-oh, our list is growing.
Did we say monkeys? I think that might not be included in the definition of livestock.
Getting very ethnic.
Where does, and perhaps I missed it at the beginning, but commercial agriculture fall in all of this, where it is farm for sale? Is that under the definition of farming that we're creating that covers that, that'll hook not into, but hook with the RAPs? And I'm not talking so much tier 1A as I am tier 1B.
So Bradley,
That's an excellent question, and that is farming for profit, so long as that is more than, I think it's 2,000. Or yeah,
Supposedly profit.
the goal, the goal being profit. If the farming has more than $2,000 in sale, they are subject to the required agricultural practices rule and therefore are exempt from municipal bylaw. And so that is captured, and that's statewide. Tier 1, there's no tiering exceptions or contemplation in that piece. As long as you have more than $2,000 in sale, you're subject to the required agricultural practices rule, and then that kind of does reestablish the pre-Taft Street status quo.
Yeah.
And moving on a little bit here, I'm going to scroll past this definition because I define food as articles or agricultural commodities for human or animal consumption. So if you're growing food that you're going to feed a horse that you have or something, that food would incorporate that. And then we define agricultural commodity. This is defined elsewhere, but means any food in its raw or natural state, including fruits and vegetables that are washed, colored, or otherwise treated in their unpeeled or natural form. And and that's defined elsewhere in the statute. The last change here there's two more changes here. We should change this to on passage. It's an easy one. And the other change here is asking the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets to adopt rules to implement the sections here to determine whether, for purposes of raising, feeding, or managing livestock, a parcel's land base is sufficient for nutrient and waste management. Just one second. So essentially asking the secretary to make rules that would help people decide what a sufficient land base is for their farming activities, and then create a process for owners or municipalities to petition the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets to determine whether a parcel's land base is sufficient for nutrient and waste management for raising, feeding, or managing livestock. So kind of creating a process It's for owners or municipalities to do that.
And then you changed the final effective date to, I think, to reflect conversation we had the other day.
Yep. Yes, and we reflect that, change that to on passage. I think I mentioned earlier, but it's the effective date of any act is July 1st of the of the year of that year, unless otherwise indicated. And I think the committee indicated that they would like this bill to be effective on passage. And if there are no more questions about this piece, I do want to talk about cannabis briefly, because that was the last piece that
Actually,
the committee
before-
asked me to address.
Yeah, before we get to that, Bradley, just, I wasn't sure when you were back in the previous sections, skipping over the definition of commodity, where that fits into this agricultural commodity.
Yeah, and so the agricultural commodity, we had the definition of food means articles or agricultural commodities. So articles is just like any kind of item that is used for human or animal consumption. And we also wanted to just highlight agricultural commodities as part of that. And then added the definition of agricultural commodity to clarify that it's food in its raw or natural form. And some things that it includes. Let's to clarify what we're talking about in this section. I think the notion was that we didn't necessarily want a municipality to, or the committee didn't want a municipality to be able to prohibit the growing of food for feeding their goats that they have or something of the sort. And so we wanted to make sure that food had that definition of both for human or animal consumption, just to clarify that piece, and then including the agricultural commodity piece in there required a separate definition.
So if we're saying, and this is the right under the right to grow food rubric, your own
That's
food
correct.
rubric.
That's correct. So we refer
Yeah.
food as the right to grow food.
Yeah. And if we're saying you can have a couple of goats, or you can have a cow, or you can have a flock of chickens, it stands to reason, I guess, that we would also be saying, and you can grow the food that you need to keep those animals growing.
That's correct.
That's sort of the idea.
And I think that those were some concerns raised by the committee in our conversations last time. So we incorporated that in here.
So I know a lot of the new language here and the complexity, such that there is any complexity, is related, it's under the right to grow food piece. And we heard a couple of committee members suggest a few minutes ago that perhaps we should be looking at that as a separate bill. While we're thinking about this now, does anybody else feel strongly one way or the other about this? We don't have to decide, but kind of interested in getting the sense of the committee on that one. You already opined, I think. Do you have,
Well,
you want to refine your?
the vegetable part seems very simple. As soon as we add the animal pieces, it gets really pre-World War II, many households would have a cow or a chickens or a pig, but they don't anymore. And when we start talking about limitations on that, we've got all these issues about water quality and adequate space and all of that to deal with. Plus, we've got the noise. We've already talked about roosters and guinea fowl. And then suppose someone wants a buffalo, a pig. If you've ever had a pig and you touch it, it doesn't want to be touched. It is really noisy. Ostriches, what about those? They can be lethal if they get out. Yet, they're kind of considered domestic in some areas. So where do you draw the line? It's just the animal piece makes this so complicated. Not the vegetable part simple.
I don't disagree with you.
Representative Burt.
Well, I guess I agree on some parts, but I disagree on the part that people don't have animals anymore. Maybe not near Montpelier, but this Cabot could decide to regulate by municipality, anything under the wraps if they chose to, go. And there are plenty of my neighbors who have, I raised, if I didn't have another farm to go alongside it in acreage, I have 4 pigs this year that were for my own consumption. And there are plenty of neighbors that do a lot of things like that. So it's quite common in our
I'm
state.
not talking about farms, I'm talking about growing your own food, not.
But these are, yeah, I'm saying people that only own a few acres and might decide to raise a pig for themselves. Or have chickens or have a cow.
I think out in Cabot, which is in tier 3 country now, so you guys just don't really count. But no, but in tier 1A, I agree with you, John, that, you get in tier 1A where you have dense housing. Are we gonna let somebody have 14 goats living in their basement? And coming up to see daylight if they see daylight. I mean, that's.
So I think the 14 goats in that scenario might have to pass muster with the agency. I think that's what we'd be asking here in the,
But I think someone with a small coop with 10 chickens or a dozen or 20 chickens, that they collect the eggs and maybe have some eggs and meat birds is,
so.
I can speak to how this works now on another
Another
time.
time, but
Yeah,
I do want to say, Joe, just to be clear, that when I said earlier that all 3 parties in these conversations had signed on to the right to grow food, the agency's position on livestock was just chickens. And like a small flock of chickens. I think that they were not talking about anything beyond chickens. So that's for what it's worth.
Wait, go ahead, I rephrased this question.
Okay, all right. Good.
So, but the agency of ag did propose in theirs to drop the acreage down to 1 acre.
You're
On the
right.
form, right?
That was, yeah, there were differences.
Which we don't have language for that here.
Yeah.
So that's, I feel like that helped to cover the base where, and it's under 1 acre, really, you don't have the land base to have livestock, maybe you have some poultry.
Yeah.
So I agree with that, but
Yeah.
if we're trying to go from the wraps to, down to almost no acreage, but still allow livestock, I think that's tricky without being able to, bring the wraps down to 1 acre and then let there be a process for establishing, does the land base, based on, because every piece is different. But I think if you have 4 acres, that could potentially be a beautiful place to have a pig or a cow or whatever. This isn't going to do anything. Or it's going to be a problem because in tier 1A or on somebody's trying to have 2 pigs on a half an acre and then village, like they stink, and whatever, and they're making, they're turning the backyard into a mud hole. So I think that's where I kind of align more with the agency of ag's language
Overall. Or so
in terms of somebody who that 1 to 4 acres who somebody wants to homestead, I feel like is a very crucial piece to make sure we're covering properly with our language.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so just Bradley and the committee, I'm just wondering, let me use an example. So I have a sheep farm in Tunbridge following the wraps. And BGS agrees to lease me the State House lawn to put 20 sheep on it. So I have control. That's part of my farm, right?
I'm sorry,
So I'm
You
just
said
saying, if I have a farm following the wraps, say even in tier 3, but I lease land, I was just using the State House lawn as an example. I lease land even in tier 1A. Does that, are we gonna run into trouble with that sort of thing? Or, you know, and even to the point where I could build a shepherd's hut, you know, a farm structure there, because whoever the landlord is agrees that I have power to farm on this parcel in a 1A here.
Yeah. So, so this bill does not restrict farming in tier 1A areas. It only restricts construction of a farm structure in tier 1A areas. So it kind of breaks out and highlights that specific piece with respect to tier 1A areas. So a municipality by bylaw cannot regulate farming practices that are subject to the required agricultural practices. So in your scenario, the farmer is subject to the required agricultural practices. Therefore, they cannot be regulated by municipal bylaw wherever that agricultural practice takes place, wherever that farming takes place.
Including lease land, right?
Including lease land. If you wanted to construct a farm structure, you could not do that in a tier 1A area unless there was a farm structure that already existed in that tier 1A area. And so that goes back to a very earlier conversation, which is saying, okay, well, what if I was farming but didn't have a farm structure in a tier 1A area? Shouldn't I be able to build a farm structure? Well, that does require different language here if the committee wants to enable that kind of activity.
While we have Bradley, just any other clarifying questions? Or you wanted to just touch on cannabis, Bradley?
I did. And if now's a good time to do that, I can.
Actually, why don't we hold off on that? Because I think that's less critical actually than getting the sense of the committee on whether we're going to try and incorporate this right to grow food into this bill, or try and handle that separately. Anybody feel strongly about it?
I like having it here. I mean, I feel like we're on the cusp of moving this forward, and it makes sense. I think it makes sense to include it here, but I mean, I'm okay with doing it separately if people want to do it separately.
Leaving out the right to grow food pieces then, and I realize it's a little hard to sort of think now what do we have in front of us language wise that is not part of that. We've said our intent language is to go back to the way we were, except in one section of the state, tier 1A sections, we would allow municipalities to regulate farm structures. And what else is any different? What else would we be doing if we did take out the right to grow food parts?
And was that a question for me, Representative?
Sorry, yeah, Bradley, I guess that is a question for you.
Yeah. Okay. And so if we took out the right to grow food, and I'm assuming we're also taking out raising, feeding, and managing livestock, if we're taking out the right to grow food, you're essentially removing C and D, and then we would also kind of remove the definitions that I added. So the agricultural commodity and then the food piece. So what this bill would do then is reestablish the pre-Taft Street status quo, that farming activity subject to the required agricultural practices rule is exempt from municipal bylaw. Construction of the farm structures is also exempt from municipal bylaw, with the exception of farm structures that are constructed within a tier 1A area, unless that farm structure existed previously. So that's what this bill would do.
Okay. Representative Nelson.
I like having the right to grow food in this bill. The only thing I think we should look at is livestock, as per Representative Bartholomew said. I think that, I don't think vegetable gardens are heinous. Strong word. I think that, I think they're fine, so.
Okay, well, good. I think let's leave it there. Bradley, do you want to just, I'm not sure whether we've given you any marching orders so that are, that are clear.
I was gonna clarify that.
Yeah.
Does the committee want to get back to me, or I've made notes, I can kind of go over some things? How do we want to proceed?
Yeah, John.
Just for clarity, so pre-Taft Street and pre-Act 181, farm structures, construction of, repairs, expansion, et cetera, were exempt from municipal regulation.
Yes.
And because of Act 181, that's why this is getting brought up now as
No,
only something you can replace that you can't.
so Taft Street, we're having this conversation just because of Taft Street. In an effort to try and find a compromise that would be broadly acceptable politically. The construct of tiers that Act 181 created, is being used here as a way to reach a compromise, potentially reach a compromise. Does that make sense?
Right, so, I mean, it's Taft Street plus 181 really is what we're dealing with here.
Well,
So,
Bradley,
if I may,
Yeah.
so yeah, this bill is not addressing things in Act 181. It adopts language from Act 181 as a way. What I think is as a way to recognize that constructing a farm structure in a densely populated area might be very difficult. And so to identify, to kind of use language to identify where that difficult or where that place might be, this bill adopted Tier 1A as a way of saying, okay, well, in this pre-identified area that we already have a statutory framework for identifying, you can't build a farm structure there. So the only thing that this bill is not in a response to Act 181. It just borrows a conceptual framework from Act 181 to say that building farm structures in this kind of place, a municipality can regulate that because it's so densely, because it is so dense. So it's just borrowing language. It's not necessarily in response to that.
Okay, and it doesn't prohibit necessarily farm structures from being built. You just have to go through municipal zoning
yeah,
to be approved.
exactly. And
Yeah, that's exactly right.
the municipalities, through their representative organization, came into the committee, shared with us that they were generally fine with having restrictions, the kinds of restrictions that existed before the Taft Street decision, with the exception of Tier 1 areas. And I think they are continuing to think about it. When I asked Bradley to draft this language, said, let's put in Tier 1A, rather than Tier 1 for discussion purposes. And let's limit this to the farm structures piece rather than everything else that could presumably be regulated. Also for the purposes of having a discussion. And I think that I'm still waiting to hear now back from anyone, either farmers or the league, with any objections to this language. Haven't heard objections yet formally. I haven't been asked to testify, to set some testimony. I know everyone's looking at it and thinking about it, but I'm not here to suggest that it would be broadly acceptable.
When do tier 1A go live, so to speak, in Vermont?
It would be years.
So do we run into a problem with the effective date then?
Yeah, Bradley, given the fact that there are no tier 1A, does that mean anything if we, currently, if we kept the effective date the way it is?
No, it's just if the municipality zoned a tier 1A, then these restrictions would kick in for that piece, right? And so if there are no tier 1As and for whatever reason there weren't any zoned tier 1As, then the point would be moot. So there's no issue with respect to the effective date, unless you wanted to push an effective date out farther, potentially you could. So if you wanted to give someone a heads up and say, hey, you can be grandfathered up until July 1st, 2027 or 2028 or something like that, right? Kind of giving someone more time, you could potentially do that.
So the effective date essentially is when towns go live with Act 1A.
But we want to restrict zoning on agriculture.
Right.
Now. So if you put the effective date out, does that allow municipalities to zone agriculture today? We don't want them zoning agriculture today.
We're talking about the effective date of the structure, not the effective date of the other funds.
Bradley, I think, I'm not sure that we've asked you to do anything then.
Okay.
So we will, I think, might be helpful for us to noodle on this some more, both individually and then have some committee discussion time. And then we may hear from other folks who'd like to comment. Representative Lipsky.
This is relevant to the point 1A. This is anecdotal, but there are a number of communities, towns that have land qualified to go in 1A, but they're burdens. So they're opting out of becoming designated as a 1A communities. So they may not be very pervasive given some of the.
I think that is relevant. And I think maybe we can invite the league in to speak to that for us. Let's take, Patricia, let's take 5 here, just maybe even 4, because we've got some other testimony and want to be sure we allow enough time for it. But thank you very much,